these Chinese strategists, they are very well read, and they do read they do take Henry Kissinger very seriously.
Now, what I term is a power dilemma, because once you have this nuclear power, then at least you can have a minimum deterrent.
Can we arrive at a conclusion that China will not solve the border issue permanently, because it is a leverage for China to keep India under check?
I believe, the decisions are never instinctive. They're also driven by larger historical perspectives.
Xi Jinping mixes Dengism with Maoism to extrapolate Chinese trade policy with the concoction that comes out from geo-expansionism and trade suppression policies.
And I think one of the biggest problems for the United States has been it has drunk its own Kool-Aid in terms of its foreign policy decisions.
It's our fault that we have not understood China, right?
The West gave the China a platform where they could experiment with various genres of war fighting, if you will.
That restrains India from forming a grand strategy which includes diplomatic, economic and military deterrence measures.
This Commerce Ministry, which we were discussing earlier, the ability of China to use trade for geopolitical purposes is exceptional. And as if you're observing from outside, it's quite exceptional how they have managed to con every single state in the world.
Hyper-focused anymore. At that point in time, it was after, say, 15 years of being almost exclusively prioritized on the Middle East and on sort of Islamic ideology.
Let's understand one thing here, right? So Chinese trade policies are linearly focused and progressive for decades and don't change in 4 years or 5 years under party politics. You know what I mean?
China did study the Roman campaigns and the Greeks and the Egyptians, and they were the ones who went on wars directly, and ultimately the empires collapsed. So what they thought is that now let's capture territory bit by bit,
So I think the West was learning all kinds of wrong lessons, whereas the Chinese were learning all kinds of right lessons.
They would have also learned from Soviet Union and the demise and the dismantlement of Soviet Union.
What is mine and what is yours is negotiable.
I think that's natural. What Trump did as far as setting a stage with China, I don't think is going to last.
China also promotes multipolarity. But again, the question is whether they are going to support India and Japan as a member of United Nations Security Council.
Okay, hello all. I am Vipul Tamhane, and I welcome you all to this panel discussion by Diplomacy Direct on the topic Global Standoff, a scenario of modern Indo-Pacific geopolitics. Diplomacy Direct is a global peace forum for interests of academicians, journalists, military personnel, and geopolitical enthusiasts. Today, we have an esteemed panel of scholars and academicians amongst us, and I take a great joy in introducing them in no specific order. So Dr. Harsh Pant, he's a professor of international relations at King's College London. He is a non-resident fellow at US-India Policy Studies at the Center of Strategic and International Studies at Washington, US. He is a director and head of strategic studies at Observer Research Foundation. Welcome, Harsh.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Dr. Matthew Croston. He is an executive director at Modern Diplomacy, which is a Europe-based international relations and politics think tank. He is also director for academic transformation at Bowie State University. He has earned his PhD in international relations and affairs from the prestigious Ivy League Brown University. So welcome, Dr. Crosston. Next is Probal Dasgupta. Probal right now is a media sensation. He is the author of Watershed 1967. So actually this book, and This book is on India's Forgotten Victory over China, which is one of the Amazon.com's bestseller in its genre. Probal is a warrior teacher, I must say, being a military veteran and guest faculty at Columbia University at New York. Besides this, he is a columnist, a leadership speaker, and a thought leader. So welcome, Probal. Next up is Professor Rajiv Ranjan. So Rajiv is an executive director of Center for South Asian Studies, Institute of Global Studies, and an associate professor at College of Liberal Arts at Shanghai University at Shanghai, China. Previously, he was a research fellow at Indian Council of World Affairs, ICWA, at New Delhi from 2015 to 2016, and a visiting senior scholar at School of Political Science and Public Administration, Shandong University at Jinan, China from 2013 to 15. Rajiv has completed his PhD in Chinese Studies from JNU. So welcome, Professor Ranjan. And now let me introduce you to our moderator for the day, Mangesh Sawant. Mangesh is academic scholar from prestigious Ivy League Columbia University in Homeland Security, Global Security, Geopolitics, Military Studies, and International Security. He is an accomplished blog writer contributing in Small War Journal, National Interest, E-International Relations, Indian Defense Review, and Modern Diplomacy. So welcome, Mangesh. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Vipul. I'll just take over from here. Professor Pant, the first question goes to you. China did study the 1990 Gulf War, that is the first Gulf War, which was a shock and awe campaign in the sense the Gulf War was over in 3 months against the third largest army in the world, Iraqi army. And its battle plans and war plans, the military doctrines have been imbibed and geared to take over the modern scenario which is going on in the Asia-Pacific region based on what happened in 1999. It also saw the US wars which went on in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that's how it has started a hybrid warfare strategy, what we call asymmetric strategic warfare. My question was that, what is your assessment on China's expansionist policies and salami slicing tactics? I will just expand this question. Henry Kissinger, in his book Diplomacy, he mentioned that civilizations do not stay forever. We got the Rome civilization, the Greek civilization, the Egyptians, they have come and gone. So have the Chinese read what Henry Kissinger has written, or have they studied history? They did study what happened in military and warfare. So what is your take on the Chinese expansionist policy, or what is going on in South China Sea and Doklam in India?
Thank you, Mangesh, and thank you, Vipul, for having me as part of this panel. I look forward to a very interesting discussion because all the panelists I know, and I have I know of their work. So coming to the question, Chinese definitely, I think, at least Chinese strategists, they are very well read, and they do read they do take Henry Kissinger very seriously. So Henry Kissinger is a person that Chinese, it is often said in the Western capitals that whatever Mr. Kissinger says, Chinese are asking him to say. So I'm sure there is an element of of what is happening between the two at the highest levels, back and forth. So in that sense, I don't think that they are unaware of the larger sort of questions about the debates in the West. I think whether it was the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, or the subsequent wars that happened, or the whole idea of how great powers rise and fall. I think this has been a template for Chinese now, as a template to study for the Chinese. In fact, there was a big program that was made for the Chinese state television on the fall of great powers and what happens to great powers. So clearly there is a lot of interest, and I think this assessment that great powers have a very difficult task at hand is something that they will appreciate. And also and another author that is very popular is John Mearsheimer, the rise and fall of great powers. The offensive realist theorist. and his ideas about what the impending U.S.-China conflict or contestation. So clearly, I think they have a very good idea of where they stand and what perhaps how they view the international system evolving and their own place in it. But what I think is also interesting is the kind of perhaps unintentionally, but somewhere the West gave the China a platform where they could experiment with various genres of war fighting, if you will. Whether it was hybrid or whether it was covert, whether it was using the extant international order to their advantage, whether it was about disinformation campaigns, whether it was about how do you influence politics in open societies and democracies. Now, this is a question that it is very interesting, that if you look at the balance of power, it has certainly shifted against the West and against the open liberal order, because the way Chinese were brought in, the whole spectacle of this idea that, look, China needs to be integrated into this order because this is good for China, this is good for the world, and this is good for the global stability, and this is somehow going to change China. Now, you go back to the 1990s, and as you were saying, Chinese were studying that unipolar moment very, very carefully. They were looking at the wars, they were looking at the technological revolution in the military, in the Western military that was happening, and the kinds of wars that were being fought by the West, and they were learning from it. But they were also learning one very important lesson, is that, look, you cannot compete with the West on its own terms. So you have to fight where you are strong and where what your strength is. And what they learned was that their strength was in covert activity. China is an opaque society. West is open. The entire Western theater was almost open for them to play with. They entered international institutions. They started manipulating it. Today we are looking at a spectacle of how WHO was used in some ways in last year. We look now at the UN Security Council being used. And if you compare today's situation with the situation in early 1990s, this idea that, let's bring China on WTO, let's bring China, let's integrate China into the global liberal international order that is going to create this middle class in China, that is going to change Chinese political culture. China is going to become more open, more transparent. So I think the West was learning all kinds of wrong lessons, whereas the Chinese were learning all kinds of right lessons. If you go back and if you start interpreting it. They said that this is a theater wonderfully open for us. We will exploit it to our advantage. We will learn from it. And there we go. I mean, there, in a way, what has often been said about great powers, that, if you want to be a great power, you have to be, all great powers have been ruthless in the past. So to blame China in that sense is also, misreading history. I think, all major powers have used all kinds of instrumentalities at their disposal. So what is surprising is not what China is doing. What to me is surprising is that why a large part of the world, somehow started believing in the superiority of their system, that somehow Chinese are going to get converted over a period of time. So I don't think China's behavior is surprising. What is surprising is the interpretation that the other side had about China's rise and about its consequences. And so I think what you are talking about in terms of its strategy, if you are the weaker party, if you know that you are still rising, and yet you have to start reclaiming one bit by bit your area of influence, salami slicing is a classic technique, and Chinese have been doing salami slicing for decades now. I mean, even when India is concerned, Chinese have been doing salami slicing for decades now. We also in India also we continue to believe, eventually we have found this right mix of diplomacy and treaty arrangements. We will somehow be able to stop China. I mean, I was studying, and Rajiv is here. We used to have professors in JNU teaching us that, look, China is a very satisfied country. As far as India is concerned, they don't want anything else. They have got what they wanted. You will never have a war with the Chinese because they have got what they wanted. Now it is up to you to decide diplomatically how. And these are some of the best thinkers in India who used to talk about it. So in a sense, this delusion that we have understood China and therefore the rest of the world can bring China on board. I think that has been the real problem, and that has got exposed last year. I don't think China got exposed. China has been exposed for a very long time. Those who understand China and those who understand great power politics, I think the conclusions that you would draw were very clear. John Mearsheimer drew it in 1990s. He was arguing, look, you're going to have to fight it out. Now, the question is, why did we still continue to believe? And still today, there is a lot of optimism that we will somehow manage China's rise, and which is quite extraordinary given what has happened last year. Some of it is, the default understanding. All right, it's just done. But I think that's the challenge that the world faces, and perhaps we'll learn and grow. But I'm not so optimistic.
Rightly said, Professor. China did study the Roman campaigns and the Greeks and the Egyptians, and they were the ones who went on wars directly, and ultimately the empire's collapse. So what they thought is that now let's capture territory bit by bit. You capture territory bit by bit. It doesn't come into international affairs. No one knows about it. It's downplayed by its neighbors. So that's how I think they are progressing with the policy right now. My next question is to Professor Rajiv. Scores of agreement have been signed between India and Pakistan, especially after 1986, when Rajiv Gandhi went to China, and there was quite a gradual opening up of the economies and also on a diplomatic front. But it is not ready to settle the border dispute up till now. So what are the China's military objectives with relations to India? What we see the foreign ministry statements is that they are very peaceful. We are not belligerent. We need to talk. They are trying to tell us that, you don't fight, you don't exceed the border, but they are not walking the talk, what they're telling in terms of their foreign ministry statements or defense ministry statements. So what do you take up of this? Why are they flouting the agreements which have been signed?
Let me thank first Vipul and Mangesh for having me here. As Professor Pant has already explained that it's our fault that we have not understood China, right? So now here also, if we look at why we have, you have already said, that we have signed many agreements, but yet to sign any conclusive border settlement agreement. Why? So what I believe is that is a kind of three-body problem. That is a famous novel by a Chinese science fiction. I kind of re-paraphrase that is that what we have is there is a two-body is Tibet and the border issue. And the third is you can keep shifting, whether it's in China-Pakistan relation or India-Pakistan relation, whether it's a domestic issue or whether it's a United States for now. So it's a kind of a three-body problem. And I also add now that is called power dilemma. It's not security dilemma that we have already studied and all that. Now, what I term is a power dilemma, because once you have this nuclear power, then at least you can have a minimum deterrence, a credible deterrence. Now, what is power dilemma that I keep in fact, I'm still defining this is the power dilemma is that the both sides is afraid that the other side is getting power. And now what is the power here that we know is that we have military power, economic power. And at the same time, you also aspire to become a membership, aspire to be a member of a kind of coveted regional or international organization like United Nations Security Council, or for that matter, NSG. So here, China objects us to getting from this power. But what we are doing is we are not accepting what China is doing, that is making friends through its Belt and Road Initiative. So in fact, we are also trying to object their going global. So here comes a power dilemma, that they are not ready to give us what we need because they are afraid that once India is in this power club, they will be using and can be a kind of a detrimental to our interest. Now, this is a very very ironical scenario where if you see that China also promotes multipolarity. But again, the question is whether they are going to support India and Japan as a member of United Nations Security Council. They are not, because they are afraid that once they become member, they will, because there is a fundamental difference between our values or their values. And now Professor Pant has already explained that when Henry Kissinger was so into that China will change. But here the goal was different, that they were always clear in the mind that, look, you have to satisfy with your democracy and we have to satisfy with our own model of government. So there is no compromise on this issue, and that we are saying the clash. The clash is of values. So here also in India, China, I think despite being like we have signed a kind of like peace and tranquility, so many we have not fired a bullet for like since 74, 76, but still. But now the basic question is that we keep to check other. We have opened this border and we have not settled it. So until and unless we resolve this crisis or kind of like this problem, like whether it's a power dilemma is there or not, India, Pakistan, we have to dehyphenate from Chinese side. And then we have also the Tibet problem. And now, because of what we are seeing, that the Chinese mostly believe that now India is in a kind of like US club. So I think this power dilemma is going to a kind of like accelerate rather than we see a sometime coming to an end. So what I believe is we are going to see more kind of like friction on the way when India, China, because we both are rising at the same time. And we have this friction point that is fault lines between India and China. So I will end here and then I will come back when you have other questions related to.
Just one more question related to the border dispute. Can we arrive at a conclusion that China will not solve the border issue permanently because it is a leverage for China to keep India under check? It's a 3,500 kilometer border. McMahon line is not defined. I think China is not recognizing the McMahon line on India's China border, but I think it signed an agreement with Myanmar on its border based on the McMahon line. So do you see China keeping that border issue flickering on and on? Because once it signs an agreement, then it has no issue. It has no leverage over India then.
True. Because as you said, that is a kind of like leverage. It's kind of like checking on India. But you have to also, again, that now recently what we have this special representative that they kept saying that we have to have early harvest. Earlier, it was Indian side that were trying to say that, okay, we have to sign this border agreement. But now what we have seen when the India, United States, the relationship started to grow and become stronger, there was a kind of like pressure on Chinese side that we have to resolve this border. So they started to say that, okay, we have to have early harvest. But now I think, again, that they believe that now the India is gone, kind of like for Chinese thinking, that they have gone into the US club. So there is no hurry now to resolve this border. And I think, and they're also clear that United States will not come to rescue India. They are very clear. So what we have to do is, I think we are here alone now. And I think that gives a kind of like a leverage to Chinese also, because they also know that the Indians are alone here. Anybody cannot do anything, no help. So now here we have to, again, a kind of like what we believe that we have to a kind of like play the game along. And that the game is that we have to keep confusing. That's what is called a strategic ambiguity or a strategic autonomy, that if you say it clearly.
Correct.
So once we keep this ambiguity, then even the Chinese are not sure that what way we are turning. And in this way, I think this play for our benefit.
Oh. Thank you, Professor. Probal, this is a question to you. Deng Xiaoping, he started market reforms after joining hands with the US and Henry Kissinger after ping-pong diplomacy. 80s and the 90s, the world's poorest nation has become today the second largest economy in the world. My question is that in their objectives, have they become stable internally in terms of economic? Everybody has a job. That is the ultimate objective of an individual anywhere in the world. A common person aspires to have a job, a nice family, a nice place to stay in. So poverty-wise, everybody has come out of poverty, if you see in China. So have they moved from a stability phase, economic stability, second largest economy in the world, to a stage now where they are going back to the Leninist ideological approaches. What Xi Jinping is doing currently is expansionist.
Right.
He's got other nations angry on him. What we have seen in the last 1 year,
Right.
South China Sea, his expansion is the sharp power is. We'll come back to the sharp power later in a separate question.
Yeah.
He's has a very. Coming back, Xi Jinping has only two friends today in the world. It's North Korea and Pakistan. So
Right.
do you see there was a transition which has happened from a market capitalist economy to a Leninist ideological approaches right now?
Right.
In the sense of what is their goal in the region now with Xi Jinping, and how is it different from the earlier times?
Right. Thank you, Mangesh, and thank you, Vipul, at the outset for having me here. Really appreciate and thanks to the panelists. And look forward to an engaging discussion. This is a very contemporary question laced with a bit of history. So if Professor Pant spoke about how sort of he spoke about Henry Kissinger. So a thought there I had in terms of how China has been leveraging certain U.S. decision making at a point in time in earlier times, and that's how Henry Kissinger's name kind of popped up. I remember when he was the first one to broker U.S.-China relations in 1970, and when he stopped by Beijing, and he was given a book by Shao and Lai, and that book was Neville Maxwell's book on the India-China War of 1962. The book was India's China War, and it actually blamed India for all the actions. All that happened in 1962, and that drove was a large part of the U.S. thinking at an early stage at that point. So again, that's the Chinese interpretation of how we spoke about interpretations and how we come to haunt open democracies which look at China in a different way, and Chinese have set ambitions. And now going back to your question on ambitions, if you were to look at, you spoke about how Chinese economies moved and where they are, what they would want to do, etc. Where is China going? Xi Jinping's ambitions, etc. So if we were to look at China in contemporary sense, it's essential to see what they would have thought of many years ago, because I believe the decisions are never instinctive. They're also driven by larger historical perspectives. Here in this case, it's again, there is a civilizational perspective as well. There is a belief that China is the heaven under the sky. The belief around Tianxia, where China is during the days of the Middle Kingdom, that was how in the 15th century it was believed to be so, that China was the power center. When China, when China came around as a new nation in 1949, it was already a part of a global order, which had been decided by the victors of the Second World War. For a long time, and you spoke about how is it different now from then. For a long time in the 60s and 70s, China was more of a regional power, as the Soviet Union was a superpower in terms of the Cold War. China was never at that level. In the 1990s, early 90s, once the Soviet Union dismantled, China was welcomed back into the system. As Professor Pant said, we misread China. How China progressed from there, he spoke about the economic uplift that happened under Deng Xiaoping. So all of that happened. The buying of treasury bonds in the US, they were all preparations for, making China a stronger economic power, because they believed that, without that, and there was the example of Soviet Union. I bring the example of Soviet Union right before them. And we spoke earlier in the discussion about the learnings. I believe they would have also learned from Soviet Union and the demise and the dismantlement of Soviet Union. We spoke about the Romans and the others, but in the more contemporary sense, Soviet Union is an example right before the eyes, and similar authoritarian regime. So I would think it's a rerun of a Cold War in certain senses now that we are seeing, with a stronger economic power as a counter to the larger democracy or the power that US has been in the earlier Cold War, and so to say, if I were to put it this way, the current Cold War. And ever since Xi has has come in, as you know, has come to power, we've had an increase in several aggressive Chinese actions, whether it is salami slicing. There have been before the Ladakh skirmish and the standoff that has happened this year. There have been 6 such standoffs with India ever since 2013, ever since Xi Jinping became in his premier. So there's clearly a Chinese objective to sort of, there's also a talk about reviving the whole Chinese aim to occupy, the center of the earth, so to say, become the power center of the earth by 2049. Perhaps there's also a hastening of that by Xi Jinping ever since he's come to power. There is also, there are several references, but they all define what China wants today. There is a book written in 1999 by 2 Chinese colonels, Tiao Liang and Wang Xunxi, who wrote about how China, and that book called Unrestricted Warfare talks about how China can use any means to take on a power that is stronger and superior to them. So all of these point out to what China would do once it becomes a strong economic power, which it is, given that, and I spoke about how China came into being when a new world order was set into place. We see that the multilateral institutions like the WHO and others have been manipulated, co-opted, influenced in certain ways. And you spoke about sharp power. We'll speak about that as well. But these are also a part of the narrative that China carries forward in its aim to be the power center of the earth at some point of time. And I think that drives essentially Xi's objectives and the Chinese Communist Party's objectives. One of the things that Professor Rajiv spoke about in terms of, and this is something that I would, interesting, he spoke about the power dilemma, and that's where I would, given the current scenario, I would think, when I say, Cold War rerun, I speak about how, like in earlier times, in the erstwhile Cold War era, you had a group of nations that were there were democracies, and the other side you had authoritarian states, and the playground was Europe. That playground has shifted to Asia and Indo-Pacific. We had a discussion the other day with Professor Pant was there, and Indo-Pacific again forms a large part of all the the pacts, the disputes, as well as the the other the trade and the other aspects that are there. It's also this region, South Asia, is the most heavily nuclearized zone as well. So that shift that has happened, the playground Asia, as I call it, and that in that again, China has a stake. China wants to establish itself. There are no clear friends. There are, again, like the erstwhile Cold War, you have a time where you have authoritarian states led by China under the BRI umbrella. You have North Korea, you have Pakistan, and the others. And you have a set of democracies who are aspiring to be together. But again, given the way democracies operate, they will never be. There could be a complex web of relationships, but not like an erstwhile NATO. But certainly, given China's increasing belligerence in terms of South China Sea, India, elsewhere, it just shows its teeth a lot more often than it did, which kind of gives India and the other nations, reasons to believe that China has ambitions and China has aggressive ambitions outside in the region. That is one area which I think, where the other nations would come together. And that also defines what you said, how it is different from an earlier time during the time of Mao or even Deng's time. China has become more powerful economically. And China believes that, having been able to manipulate, control, co-opt some of these multilateral institutions and other nations under the BRI loan line, I think China believes that it has a greater play as compared to an earlier times where China was trying to establish itself in the region. And that's why it had it had, it was going up against India more often, but largely it didn't have that ambition that it has today. So the ambition has changed, the scale has changed, and the playground has also shifted from Europe to Asia. So there are a lot more stakeholders.
Right. Thanks, Probal. Vipul, coming back to you, US has been applying sanctions, trade sanctions on many countries, if you see in the last 50, 60, 70 years. It is a financial power. So we have seen Iran can't operate on the SWIFT system. And since Trump has come, he has applied trade sanctions. He has applied sanctions on individuals in Hong Kong, particularly. A couple of people are working in the Chinese industry connected with the Chinese military.
Mm-hmm.
Now, China has got agitated, and across the world, it is applying sanctions against countries which is speaking against it or which is speaking against it in the United Nations. For example, a ripe case is Australia.
Mm-hmm.
It has banned coal, it has banned wine imports. What is in China's role? What is China's role? Is it playing geopolitical games for trade? What is in your opinion, that these things are happening?
So, at the onset, thanks everybody for being here, and it's pleasure sharing the panel with you all. So Mangesh, answering your question, so let's understand one thing here, right? So Chinese trade policies are linearly focused and progressive for decades and don't change in 4 years or 5 years under party politics. You know what I mean, right? Like how Probal said that China has been preparing, right? So since 1970s and 80s, China's economy practices Dengism like a religion, right? Where it picks its political and economic ideologies brought by Chairman Deng Xiaoping, who opened their trades with Jimmy Carter's US, right? And now Xi Jinping mixes Dengism with Maoism to extrapolate Chinese trade policy with the concoction that comes out from geo-expansionism and trade suppression policies, right? Geo-expansionism is its salami slicing in Indian, Nepalese, and Bhutanese territories. Two policies, one state strong arming with Taiwan for the Malacca Strait trade route, along with trade suppression policies that loan dumping and indebtment of weaker economies to eventually have their lands for strategic purposes, for military or trade purposes, right? China invested $8 trillion in the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Sri Lanka-Laos seaport, the CPEC via Pakistan, to touch over 60% of world population for China's trade, right? Also, the Maritime Silk Road project, which will open 6 trade routes that like your London to Yiwu Railroad and the South China Sea to Africa network for ports. So the geopolitical experts have built a string of pearl theory around them, as it allows China to maintain naval bases across Indian Ocean to create pressure on India and the trading partners under the pretext of guarding shipping routes in Indian Ocean, but really for trade, right? So ever-growing agreements for projects like Minsk Industrial Park in Belarus, Tawang Tolai coal mining project in Mongolia, Sinopec refinery in Saudi Arabia, Wintan thermal power plant in Vietnam, Pan-Pakistan fiber optic network. So much that, now 7 out of 10 global infrastructure giants are Chinese, right? So accounting to 60 countries signing Chinese government-funded projects, including major Indo-US allies also, right? So they are gobbling the world with their strategy for trade agenda. So yes, this is all geopolitical games for trade.
Thanks, Vipul. Professor Matthew, this question goes to you. Huawei was the poster child before Trump came. There was a lot of positive things written about Huawei. You cannot ignore that company. In terms of 5G, it is the only company in the world which has gone quite well ahead. There is no Western company which comes very near to it. It can't be destroyed. When Trump came, he has banned Huawei. Secondly, Boris Johnson banned Huawei. And there's a domino effect in Europe and across the world where Huawei has been banned from putting 5G infrastructure in terms of civilian sector or maybe defense sector or internally homeland security and defense, the government sector. So now the point is that because of ban on Huawei, Huawei went into a loss of $11 to $12 billion last year. Huawei had to sell out its Honor phone unit to a local municipality for $14 to $15 billion back in China. And Huawei is not the only country. Xiaomi is another. Huawei is not the only company which went bust, which is on the verge of getting bust. Xiaomi, which is again a mobile manufacturer, is also on the verge of getting bust. It is going to losses because of US bans and several other bans in Europe and UK. Do you think the Chinese economy will be affected because of ban on Chinese companies? And if they are affected, how they will be affected? Because these bans have been applied on the very high-tech industries where China was supposed to be a power in the artificial intelligence areas. So what is your take on this?
I'll piggyback on all the other comments earlier about thank you for the invitation. Always happy to be here with all of you. The comments so far have been so fascinating. I almost regret having a question because I want to talk to things that Dr. Pant said and Dr. Dasgupta and Dr. Ranjan. There's so many fascinating things that are being discussed. But one of the things that I think it connects with the question, Mangesh, that you gave me is one area in which China has far out-strategied and strategized the United States has been in its ability to see long-term planning and prioritize long-term planning over short-term adversarial animosity and problems. I think any kind of trade sanctions or any kind of targeted sanctions that go against specific powerful companies, will it hurt? Of course, it does. But I think China also is very adept at seeing that pain as almost really a short-term pain that they ultimately are looking to strategize out in terms of its long-term goals and priority. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Maritime Silk Route have been mentioned, but I also just wonder, because one of the things the United States has always been very poor at, quite frankly, in my opinion, has been, we have this phrase in the United States called drinking the Kool-Aid. And I think one of the biggest problems for the United States has been it has drunk its own Kool-Aid in terms of its foreign policy decisions. What Dr. Pant said at the very beginning about how it just simply believed if we bring China in, we try to develop a middle class, everyone will instantly become Americans. If you talk to that's what's going to happen. Because there's this belief drinking our own Kool-Aid that the democratic principles and the democratic political regime and free market, transparent, open societies are the ones that will just rule if people are given a choice. And that no other type of closed regime would ever have any kind of success preventing that kind of thing. I think China, if anything, has proven that as not necessarily as automatically an assumption correct as we have said in the past from the American side in terms of foreign policy experts. So the reality for me has always been, I don't think it's so much about how much can America affect the Chinese economy, but what the real danger is going to be, what happens if the American economy, if China gains real economic independence from the American consumer market, right? America has always had this very fine balance involving China and economic progress in the sense that it pushes a globalization system that relies on Chinese participation, that depends on Chinese participation for its products in the American consumer market, while also then pushing that American consumers just consume, and out-consume every nation on earth. And so our security is almost tied into the fact that as long as we keep buying stuff, China will not be as aggressive towards the United States because it relies on the American market for so much of what it really wants to do long term. If China succeeds in pushing away from that, if China diversifies, which is just such a simple free market economic principle that we sort of ignore that China has been doing for a long time. If China is ever able to wean itself off of the American consumer market and focus on other global markets to an equal degree, then we're going to have a really, really interesting discussion across the global community, because China will be empowered in a way that it hasn't before. And it won't have to really rely as much on will the United States be upset with us over this or over that? If it's not as interdependent with the American consumer economy, things could be very, very different on the global scale.
Thank you, Professor Crosston. That was a nice answer. I'm going to go back to Professor Harsh Pant. Professor Pant, there are small powers and there are great powers. If you see in Southeast Asia, China has been surrounded by smaller powers, what we call the ASEAN membership. We got Philippines, we got Vietnam, we got Cambodia, we got Singapore. Singapore is as small as, it's a city-state, it is as small as Bombay. But it is going on buying weapon systems which are very powerful, such as F-15, which has a range of 1,500 kilometers. The Americans use it quite widely in the Middle East during the Gulf Wars, various Gulf Wars, including 2003 Iraq invasion. It has also bought Apache helicopters. According to Weiss, Michel, and Jakub Greigen in their book, The Unquiet Frontier, when smaller states don't necessarily or exclusively try to increase their power when they are left to themselves, they usually accommodate a larger and a hostile power. How do you see the response of Vietnam, Singapore, and Philippines to China's belligerent policies? I'll tell you one example. What is happening in Singapore? Singapore is so small, but it has got such a large and powerful weapons armada with it that it is unable to practice military exercises. For example, the Singapore Air Force has to come to India because of lack of land. So the size of Singapore is as big as Bombay. So my question is that how are these small powers going to accommodate China in terms of its belligerent policies?
Mangesh, for most of the countries in Southeast Asia, the challenge has always been how do you, and not always, but now, how do you manage the China-US binary, and how do you manage that, that engagement? Now, if you go back in history, what they had done was, the whole premise of ASEAN was that it was centered around this idea that America's hegemony somehow precluded the possibility of any other power emerging. So in a sense, America as a major power in Southeast Asia was able to give them that kind of security that because, America is not going to invade them, it's far away country, but it provides a security umbrella. And that security umbrella would preclude for them the possibility that any other power amongst themselves or from in the region would be able to cast that kind of dominance that perhaps, is not good for a smaller state. But what China has done is now it has appended that pendulum, it has appended that balance. So now you have a situation where China is economically powerful. And so, this idea that economic power of China can no longer be ignored, can no longer be shunned. All of these countries all are dependent on China economically, and China's, economic entanglement means certain costs. Now, what has happened over the last few years is what the balance was that while we will rely on the Chinese for economic security, our larger strategic security would be provided by the West or by the Americans in particular. Now, what has happened is that as China became aggressive on the understanding that now it can project power, we have seen, America not standing up to its security commitments, and that particularly happened under Obama period. And I think that's a very, very important marker in a sense about in the Indo-Pacific. Had Obama administration stood up to China on South China Sea, we would have seen a very different framework emerging in Southeast Asia or in the larger Indo-Pacific. Because what happened was that all the countries learned one lesson, that America now cannot be trusted. Either it is not willing or not able to provide for their security. So what, that important transformation that happened, it changed the mindset. And so we are now looking at, you have countries which are, even in ASEAN, great divisions in ASEAN as to what should be done about China. But clearly that division is so fundamental now that it is being manipulated by China. So China has its own powers in ASEAN which project China's viewpoint. And the other countries that want to stand up to China find it difficult. You have countries like Vietnam, for example, very robustly anti-China. Mm-hmm. You have countries like Indonesia, which have a natural logic in terms of standing up to China. But they find it very difficult within the ASEAN framework. So that I think that very, very subtle balance that these smaller countries wanted to have in the region was perhaps overlooked by Washington in particular. And that has engendered certain costs for these countries, for the region, and for American foreign policy as well. So if you look today, for example, Mr. Trump, whatever his other problems was, I think in other areas, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, he I think will be remembered as one of the most robust presidents who defined Indo-Pacific, who projected a certain sense of American commitment to the Indo-Pacific, and who actually galvanized the countries in some ways. Now, Mr. Biden, there is a lot of hesitancy about when Mr. Biden might, how he might pivot. Now, my understanding is, and I think a lot of people would agree, that perhaps he may take his time, but eventually he has to stand up to China because there is no other option. But if you look at the response of the countries, it's very interesting because almost all of these countries are now looking back and saying, well, can we look at America? Can we look at the Biden administration? How much benefit of doubt should we give to the Biden administration? How much weight should we do? And time is not on their side. So clearly, for them, they have to stand up. They have to make a commitment. And if you look, if they are comparing between America and China, the point that you were making, they find that China is here. It's rising. Its strategic intent is clear. Whatever it might be, it might be malevolent, but it is clear. So naturally, they will adjust their foreign policy more in tune with what Chinese want than say what the Americans want, which is still a bit confusing, which is still dependent on party in power, personality in power. And so that changes the framework for a lot of these countries. And I think that's a real dilemma now for a lot of these smaller countries, for a lot of these Southeast Asian countries. And I would say, even for a country like India, when you look at, when you think of commitment from other countries, from major powers, how much can you rely on that commitment is a big issue. I think Rajiv talked about that we have to fight our own wars, which is true. But you would like robust partnerships. You would like partnerships to signal their intent. If you see some of these declassified documents that came out on Indo-Pacific, just as Trump administration was leaving office, the kind of robust statements about India and about the Sino-Indian border dispute, that was quite, I think that was the first that we saw American commitment on Sino-Indian border. Now, we don't know what Mr. Biden is bringing. So we are also looking, we have to frame our policies in accordance in real time vis-a-vis China. So can you then wait for Mr. Biden to, first put his house in order, give a clarity about China, or should we move ahead and also see where we can build other partnerships, where we can also maybe accommodate China in some areas? And we don't know because, if the other major power, if the other great power in the system is not willing to give a very clear message to the allies that they are standing up and they will move in a certain direction, it creates dilemmas for all the countries. And I think that's what we are seeing for this, for smaller countries that you mentioned, but even for a country of the size of India, which has its own dilemmas vis-a-vis China. So clearly, I think that flux will take some time to settle. But the Chinese, because of their clarity of intent, can put pressure on other countries, which perhaps is different from what other democracies or other great powers as democracies can do.
That was an interesting perspective on the small powers, because usually these are the powers who feel neglected, and they are also not powerful even when formed in a bloc like ASEAN and other local regional great blocs. Coming back to Probal, the Qin dynasty in 225 BC brought all the warring states together in China. China was not a nation. I think after Qin dynasty took over, the warring states came together. It formed a uniformed entity today known as China. So do you think in a historical perspective and an higher perspective that Xi Jinping is trying to do the same thing? He's looking at the world as a disparate powers who are fighting among themselves, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in Southeast Asia or whether it's in Europe in terms of conflicts, wars. Do you think it is his idea to have a Sinocentric world, a Sinocentric policy, that he will get all the, in his opinion, all the current warring states together? What is your view? Is this scenario playing out in any region of the world?
If I were to understand the question, are you asking whether he would be, his policies would generate the coming together of powers elsewhere?
Yeah, what I was beginning to say is that, is he acting as the emperor of Qin dynasty who brought the warring states together? So he sees today's world as warring states. So is he trying to get all the world together through a Sinocentric vision?
So I think, look, there is, if you look at the past, there were, the states that we just spoke about, some of them Vietnam and, the littoral states in that area, they were all, they were all beholden to the Middle Kingdom, and, there's a history there. So in a way, there is something that China wants to impose and bring forth its its historical understanding of the region. And I think that's where that's what when I spoke earlier of the Tianxia, which meant there's heaven under the earth, which is what China would look to do in the present scenario. And again, given China's interpretation of the world order, China believes that it has a space and a place as a central, a central space in the world power order, and that is what China would do using its historical interpretation of its space in the world order. And saying that's what Xi Jinping and China's aim and belief systems would be like. And I think given where China is, and I spoke about how China wants to move forward with a plan in place. And that plan, again, when we go back, we see how China has built that plan over the years, over the last 15 years, over the last 18 years. And I think that's, coming from Deng Xiaoping's time, Mao's time to Deng Xiaoping's time, when China has grown from a regional power to more of an economic powerhouse in that period. And then started to control the multilateral institutions, and that's where China wants to impose. And if you look at China's, for instance, use of certain, if I may call it sharp power in modern senses to influence thinking of other states and other, institutions, media, etc. So that is a tool that China uses today to impose itself in terms of the global opinion, in terms of global perspectives on China. And these are non-governmental perspectives. These could be media, these could be academic institutions, and all else. So if I look at China, for instance, in 1961, China invited President Mitterrand, Francois Mitterrand of France. He'd come to, then he was not a president, but then he was a prominent politician. He'd come to China, and when he went back, he spoke highly of China. He spoke about the fact that there was no famine, there was nothing happening, everybody was had enough to eat, etc. There were others, politicians and scholars who would be invited, and then they would go back and speak well of China. That was 1960. So they had a thought out plan even then as to how they could influence world opinion. Today, we see that happening in a far larger manner. There's $10 billion spent a year in external propaganda, and that sharp power is used to further Chinese ambitions. We look at the COVID-19 pandemic, how China reacted, and in terms of the WHO, as opposed to SARS in 2003, and you will see that it was reported early on in 2003 as vis-a-vis 2019. You see in various forums like the NBA. The NBA league that the US runs, and it has a league in China as well. And the NBA had actually offered support in terms of the Hong Kong protests, and the league was blacked out in China. So there is also, and if I remember, executives of Cathay Pacific were laid off because they had expressed opinions in social media in favor of the Hong Kong protests. So if you look at Hong Kong, for instance, if you look at some of the other issues, China has imposed itself in various ways, whether it is arm twisting corporates, whether it is co-opting social media, influencing opinion makers, but it is all with the objective of historical ambition of gaining a lot of traction for China. And that's why you see the other things that we already have spoken about in terms of China's influence in the South China Sea and China's belligerence or China's dominance over the smaller nations. And that is also juxtaposed against the US, the changes in the US and the coming to power of the Biden administration, which is again a wait and watch. And given that China knows that democracies function in different ways without the purpose that an authoritarian regime as powerful as China would be, they would believe that they would one day have their historical perspective come to fruition. And that's the path they have taken. I spoke about the sharp power. I spoke about the use of the media. I spoke about wooing journalists, etc. This media warfare has been part of the official theme since 2003. It has been part of the political goals of Beijing's military strategies since 2003. We spoke about a short while ago about how the US interpreted or misinterpreted. But sometimes I'm baffled in terms of how the media warfare was part of a political agenda, a political line from 2003, and the world missed it. It was influencing public opinion, and several other aspects were added as they went along. But I think that's with a purpose. We spoke about how the US saw it, the others saw it, but I think it's been a case of misinterpreting the entire Chinese focus on where they want to be and how they want to do that.
Right. Thank you, Probal. Professor Rajiv Ranjan, question for you. IR study has started and flourished mostly in the West, US and Europe. Is there a China-based IR theory on which its military and foreign policies are based?
Yeah, thank you, Vipul. As Probal has talked about this Tianxia thesis that was much talked about, but again, we have to see what there is an academic debate and then a policy debate. We have to separate. And then again, I think Chinese are more realistic or pragmatist when they try to combine the both. And if we see the mainstream academia in China, and then they have various groups. They have, of course, they haven't developed as such a Chinese school of IR, but there are a coming up. But the point that there are school of thought is Xinhua school of thought, that they try to focus on the moral realism. But again, the corner or main pillar of that thought is also power, because they believe that even whether we talk about the Hans Morgenthau, the realism, that is the power for peace, to ensure the peace and for the development also. And if we come to the Kenneth Walls, or whether we come to the bipolar world system, the thing is that we have to have a peace too, and then we have a development. And now what the Chinese scholar is trying to say that for that matter, this Yan Xuetong, that he's trying to propagate, that is a moral realism, that every powers, like Professor Pant has already said, that even all the great powers have behaved ruthlessly in some point of time. So what he is trying to say is that China should behave like a moral power, and he has his own writing about that how China should behave as a moral power. Now, coming back to again, there are a scholar who talks about a constructivist theory, but again they try to modify, or we can say that the IR theory with Chinese characteristics. Now, when they say that what is the constructivist theory is, they try to say that there is a professor who has a very instrumental in writing relational theory, that is a your relation identify or kind of like create your identity. And based on that article, there is a professor from Taiwan who wrote an article, very good article, about the Pakistani identity. And he believes that even though the Chinese, Pakistani are not Chinese, kind of like not part of this Confucius realm, like if you say that, and then, but the Pakistani are behaving like a kind of like Chineseness. Why? So he says that because of your relationship that is creating your identity. So kind of like Pakistan is becoming a kind of like non-Chinese, but behaving in a Chinese way. And what are those Chinese way? That is, the Chinese way is like whatever China is saying that you have to accept or kind of like propagate. So this creates your identity. And then you have like balance of power. And then again, like a different variant of balance of power. And then he believes that there is a balance of power, again, the power. Now, Wang Zisi, he believes that like what US has done, not like the previous hegemon or like the power, like United Kingdom, who went and colonized the power. Now, what is US is doing is instead of colonizing, they are trying to kind of like convert the US will as a general will. Now, what is that general will? Like the democracy, like you have this human rights. So instead of now China, the Chinese scholar is trying to say that we have to also create this kind of this general will. And what is those general will is peace and development that they are trying to promote. That is what is all about. They try to say that is the Belt and Road Initiative. So they are trying to create a kind of a general will, and that can be accepted by all the powers. Now, if we go into a kind of like Tianxia system, I think there are not many takers about this Tianxia system in China itself. There are like kind of like more into a realistic school of thought or a liberalism. But again, if you believe in that Wang Zisi, who believe that even though you have economic interdependence, but that does not translate it into a political stability between the two countries. For example, India and China, we have so much economic relationship. Of course, it's tilted in Chinese favor, but that have not transformed this relationship into a kind of like a political stable or kind of like what is like partnership or a static partnership. So there is a kind of like huge debate. Now, what I think is like what you have like Tianxia system, and then you have this promoting Chinese will as a general will, that is peace and development is coming as a community of shared destiny. And that's the main kind of like coming as a kind of, you can think as a kind of like a Chinese policy or Chinese IR policy or Chinese IR theory that is coming up. And there are a lot of scholars who is discussing now community of shared destiny. Now, when I say that like the peace and development, so you have like a balance, you have to balance. And then when it comes to the balance of power, then how you balance. There are like, coming to the South Asia, we have a kind of like a scholar in Bhutan wrote a long time back, that is, what is that? Offshore balancing. That is, India should be not threaten our interest. So what we have to do is offshore balancing. So there is a huge kind of like a whole plethora of debate within Chinese academic circle. And I think, again, that is the main argument is that we have to develop our military because that is a cornerstone that will only help China in the long run. But at the same time, you have to create new norms. And that new norms are, that is peace and development, the multipolarity that we have already, I said, and then how to create this multipolarity. Then there is a dilemma within the Chinese academia, whether they are going to promote or support Japanese or Indian membership to UNSC or not, or like G20. So there are like a lot of scholars, even in Bhutan, that they believe that China is a kind of not in a status quoist state, but it's a rather as a kind of reformist status quoist state. But again, there is a like kind of like debate. China is a reformist state till China becomes the part of that organizations or like a platform. Once you enter and then you become a status quoist. So there is a criticism also. So what I believe is, again, that is in academia, you have this debate that is the power should be their military power, but you have to like tone down in policy making that you become a kind of like benevolent, or what Yen Shui-Tong propagate is that you become a moral power. That is a moral realism.
That was an interesting perspective, because we don't find anything in what is happening inside China in terms of higher theories. That was very, very interesting, and you threw much more light on what is happening about their thinking. Coming back to you, Professor Matthew Croston, there are tipping points in history in terms of military, diplomatic, economic, and sociological. But what we have seen since the last 70 years, since the World War II ended, many tipping points have been crammed in this era of 70 to 80 years since World War II. First is the Soviet Union ended. US became the preeminent superpower. The first high-tech Gulf War takes place. Then we see the era of liberalism taking place when during the Clinton administration. Francis Fukuyama wrote the book End of History. In the triumph of democracy, liberalists have triumphed all over the world. Then suddenly, there was this black swan event. Americans never thought that would happen. 9/11 takes place. Last 18 years, they were involved in counterinsurgency operations, terrorism. After Trump has come, Chinese have expanded into South China Sea. It has clashed with India in Doklam, in the Galwan Heights. So do you see the US is shifting its focus from counterinsurgency and Iraq to the strategic threats from peer competitors? According to your assessment, will great power rivalry take place between US and China in the Indo-Pacific? Now, what we have seen in the last 2 years is that, hey, Trump has said to all the regional powers in Middle East, such as Israel, UAE, don't fight amongst yourself. I am losing money looking after an security interest out there. Iran is a common enemy. Listen, guys, you sign hands. Israel is signing hands with Saudi Arabia. I think 2 days back, it has signed an agreement of opening an embassy in UAE. UAE is opening an embassy in Israel. So do you think there's a military shift taking place from the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific?
I think that is honestly, I think that was something that really was begun under President Obama. The idea that we want to ultimately not be hyper-focused anymore. At that point in time, it was after, say, 15 years of being almost exclusively prioritized on the Middle East and on sort of Islamic ideology, radicalism, extremism as being the guiding force in so much of our foreign policy. It was almost like a relief when it was announced that pivot to Asia, this focus on the Indo-Pacific region, because there was, at least I know amongst some friends and colleagues within DC, it was the idea that while the tension and the potential conflict is no less important and can be just as deadly, just as dangerous to global order, there was also a belief that in the Indo-Pacific region comes a certain, what Dr. Ranjan just mentioned, this sort of realistic pragmatism would reign supreme in so many of the country's foreign policy thinking and strategizing, so that there was a sense of any kind of shift into the Indo-Pacific region might also be a shift towards sanity, rationality, which is they almost didn't necessarily feel for the previous 15 years when dealing with radical extremists based on religious philosophy in the Middle East. Dealing with the Islamic State, dealing with Daesh, does not give one much hope of necessarily having realistic pragmatism be the guiding philosophy of foreign policy maneuvers and decision making. So I think that's natural. What Trump did as far as setting a stage with China, I don't think is going to last. I think, and that's almost domestic concern in United States politics, in the sense that we were talking before today started. If you remember, literally right after the inauguration, Biden went to the White House and immediately started signing executive orders, as many as 17, to basically just reverse some of the executive orders that Trump had issued during his 4 years. So whether this is wise or unwise, there's going to be a natural sort of knee-jerk reactionism to much of the first 100 days of President Biden to undo as much as he can of whatever was done under Trump. It will be interesting to see how that's impacted in terms of some of Trump's decisions toward China. The bigger issues, and we've been talking quite a bit about sort of almost philosophical positions in this, which I always find incredibly fascinating, but I still think there's a strategic mistake the United States does. It's sort of its original sin and its continuing sin, which is it just presumes either consciously or subconsciously. I waver on this constantly on a pendulum in my own thinking, whether the United States does this consciously or unconsciously. It always just presumes that the way it approaches power, the way it approaches expression of power and strategic positioning on the global stage is naturally what any other powerful state is going to do. That it will simply copy that American model, not necessarily talking about democratic regime or change. It's about just how we express power, how we feel privileged within the global order, why other countries are supposed to listen to us. China will have to do that too, because China is the next great power or the next greatest power compared to us, quote unquote, the United States. I think that's a mistake. I've always thought that was a mistake and have spoken for a long time on it, because I just think it puts America into its own little corner and makes it less maneuverable if another country, in this case China, decides to take a strategic tactic or strategic positioning that is not a copy and a model of American strategic positioning and power expression and philosophy of power. I guarantee when some of the problematic things we've talked about, China more than anything else is about preserving its regime and wants people on the outside not messing with its attempt to preserve its regime. It's its business. It's like I'm into self-preservation and mind your own business is almost how I sum it up in very short terms. And the problem with the United States is it doesn't do either one of those very well. And I think it would be very fascinating moving forward. In fact, I think the Chinese will always, and the Russians have been fantastic at this for decades now, since the end of the Cold War, which is just sort of saying, listen, you criticize us all the time, but we only do exactly what the Americans do. Just when the Americans do it, you let the Americans get away with it. When we do it, the Russians, you criticize us. So as long as the Americans do this stuff on the global stage, we're going to still do it too. And China doesn't do that exact tactic stylistically, but it does believe in the principle of what the Russians have shoved in the Americans' faces for 20 years, which is that when you violate certain principles because it suits your priorities, you do things because it's your own self-preservation, we can do that as well. I think to a certain extent, we look at what happened on January 6th in the United States, the quote unquote insurrection of Trump fanatics or Trump fans and supporters. They see that as, we call it an insurrection, and what the Chinese, I think, would think is the United States was simply preserving its regime, as it should. So we're going to preserve our regime whenever we have people criticizing us or taking a position against us. I'm not trying to say that's right or wrong. I'm simply saying the United States has a tendency strategically to never lend any credence to that power. And I think it's incredibly powerful. This realist pragmatism is incredibly powerful and efficient as a guiding philosophy. And it'll be interesting to see if the United States ever makes a course correction on that.
Thank you. That was quite an enthralling explanation. Coming back to Vipul, free trade agreements are led to declining manufacturing in India and have allowed an unchecked flow of Chinese imports into India. Mm-hmm. So India's trade deficit with the current RCEP nations is around $105 billion. Mm-hmm. It has registered a trade deficit with 11 RCEP members, including China, South Korea, and Australia. And with China, it has a massive trade deficit of around $55 to $60 billion. In Asia, there are a plethora of bilateral and multilateral agreements in the APAC region. Do you see an overlap of agreements at there are FTAs, there is ASEAN, there is TTP will come up right now. So do they negate each other, and should India sign the RCEP?
So Mangesh, plethora is a good word to mention here. There is ASEAN, like you said, there is APEC, GATT was there, SAARC, TRIPS, and many more. in the multilateral range, and countless in bilateral, actually. These are more like stumbling blocks than the stepping stones, right? Idea behind RTAs were supposed to be key and reversible features for global trading systems, aimed at reducing trade cost by easing the movement of goods across the border, right? Now the overlapping or the domino effect happens when countries with smaller GDP have strong motivation to increase their membership to various trading blocs to achieve these trade benefits, right? However, due to this overlap in multiple blocs, these agreements fall short in matters of origin, and impacts negatively on national authorities and economic operators. Increasingly, operating, these increase the operating costs for both, or multilaterally, right? So as an effect, the performance crumbles under pressure of fulfillment, and then as a result of which is either decoupling of agreements or a nation seeking help from bully nations like China, right? Now, China's trade and foreign policies are congruent. What is mine, and what is yours is negotiable, right? So that's where these RTAs fail in APAC region. With regards to RCEP, India's waiting, and watching, and maybe even ditching, right? So this move at a very third RCEP meeting proved to be well thought, primarily to avoid the overlapping of agreements itself. Also, the other major reasons being India's economic thought alignment and reduction of trade deficit with others, like the IPR protection, non-competing investments, etc. This is already, like you said, there is a 50 billion trade deficit with China. In India, India's dipstick with FTA, we learned that export are just 15% cumulative compared to 35% imports from the proposed RCEP nations, yielding very less for India. Since 2019, even China wanted to woo India for its huge market, but India has a 2.93% bilateral trade reduction YOY with China, already down to 40 billion from 60 billion from the previous year. Also, we don't know whether or not China will behave itself in terms of e-commerce, dumping, rules of origin, and trade remedies. Hence, right now, staying out of RCEP is a good decision. That's that.
Okay. Professor Pant, I think the next question will go to you. We have seen India, which is flanked by two nuclear powers, China and Pakistan, and they have been instigating India through terrorism. China has been militarily arming the Pakistanis. In diplomatic circle, it is seeing that it is FATF does not apply sanctions. The UNSC sanctions are not applied. It is using the veto in the Security Council. Why doesn't India form a grand strategy in terms of China? What we have seen is that India doesn't want to provoke, irritate, or antagonize China. India is more concerned about China's sensitivity than its national security and sovereignty. Why isn't there a quid pro quo for India to agree to a one China policy? China should agree, reaffirm a one India policy. India is dealing much more on a tactical and local issues. So what is in your take that restrains India from forming a grand strategy which includes diplomatic, economic, and military deterrence measures? Professor Pant.
Some of the issues, Mangesh, are are institutional, and some are more more process oriented. One aspect which perhaps India's we have seen that the debate on India's long-term strategic thinking has been going on for quite some time, and we are not very good at doing that. Our ministries, our institutions work in silos. It is only recently we have seen some movement towards a more comprehensive approach towards towards in foreign policy, for example. And the other aspect, and I'll just talk about it briefly in a bit. But the other aspect, which is equally important, is that our fixation with Pakistan, has also taken away a lot of our focus on China. Now, ideally, Pakistan problem ceased to become a Pakistan problem long back. Pakistan was a problem. Pakistan was creating a lot of issues for India, but more as a nuisance value. Now, what happened was that once Pakistan started getting the support from China, it became a very different sort of a question. It became a very different sort of an issue. So today, India does not have a Pakistan problem. It has a China problem. Your Pakistan policy is a subset of your China policy. So if you can get China right, you will manage Pakistan. But unfortunately, our ability, if you look at our political discourse, it has been much more robust on Pakistan. You have political parties that will contest each other. You will fight it out in parliament. You will fight it out in public platforms. But on China, there has been this unique consensus that somehow we have to manage it. Now and I'm not saying it was wrong. I think if you are a part of if there is a disparity with a country like India has with China on economy and military matters, you have to tread cautiously. You can't be reckless with your foreign policy with a big power. I mean, there's a difference between dealing with China. There is a difference in dealing with Pakistan. But there were certain aspects of this evolution that should have happened long ago. Today, China is rattled by India's infrastructure building on the border. But what prevented India from building that infrastructure in the first place for the last several decades? That's a question that I think every right-thinking citizen should ask of its government. We have seen over the last several decades this question: border infrastructure is very weak. I was a student then, and we used to hear this thing happening. The border infrastructure is very weak. It's terrible. Look what the Chinese are doing on the other side. But nothing happened on the ground as far as India was concerned. This issue about trade deficit was going on forever and ever. This idea that Chinese are militarizing Tibetan plateau had been going on forever and ever. So our response, lackadaisical response, our response has been pretty fixated on Pakistan, as if managing Pakistan would give us the great power status that we so deemed has been part of the problem. And then you had the institutional problem. That institutionally we are not prepared to take on a challenge like China. China, as we have been discussing, has a certain idea of its role in the world, and where all the institutions of the state work towards that end goal. Whether it's Commerce Ministry, which we were discussing earlier, the ability of China to use trade for geopolitical purposes is exceptional. And as if you're observing it from outside, it's quite exceptional how they have managed to con every single state in the world. And major powers, these are all major economic powers, even bigger powers than India, are being conned by China into saying that, look, we are such a big, give us this or else we will do this. And that, that approach where every single major European country, Western country fell for that, I think is a tribute as much to China's diplomatic felicity as it is to our own stupidness. But whatever the question is, the idea that we have not been able to bring all the instrumentalities of power together. It's only now that we are starting to look at commerce, for example, trade, as a very important part of that discussion. When we talk of how to reduce over-reliance on China and taking some concrete steps toward that end, that what happened last year has shaken us in some ways, which is perhaps will do good for us in framing a national security response. But again, the inability to think through, and here I would also like to point out that you cannot, while we are getting better in some areas, I think one area where we are still very weak in terms of our response to China's rise is where our education, universities, think tanks, how they operate. Our sinologists, for example, we have a paucity of people who know Mandarin or Chinese. I mean, this is a challenge again, which we have seen for the last several decades. What have we done about it? Nothing. So, in a sense, unless you start looking at your challenge through a holistic prism, you will not be able to manage China in a ways that has often been, that has often come naturally to us. We are very good at ad hoc decision making, but that ad hoc decision making only takes you so far. After that, beyond that ad hocism, you need a long-term strategizing for an adversary like China. Pakistan was all right. It's a small state. You can manage it. And it has no grand designs apart from creating irritants for India. But China has grand global designs, and you are part of that global design. China does not look at India as an adversary, as a direct adversary. So for China, India is part of a larger global matrix. And so we have to respond to an adversary which is looking at replacing the US. So how do you manage to do, how will you do that unless all your institutions are working towards that synchronized goal? So I think that's a challenge that India faces even today, even what happened to us last year. And unless we get some of the basic fundamentals right, I think we'll keep on having these debates every year. Oh, Chinese have done this to us, Chinese have done that to us. But ultimately the fault, as they say, is in our stars, not what the Chinese are doing.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was very interesting discussion from your side. Thank you very much. Since time is running off, I'll just keep one question to each of you all. The next question I would put it to Professor Rajiv Ranjan. Rajiv, let's take a hypothetical scenario. What happened after World War III in Yalta Conference? The three victors met together. There was the Russians, there was the British and the Americans, to see how a post-World War, the post-World War II world can be established. Let's imagine Eisenhower, Ben-Gurion, and Xi Jinping meet. In that meeting, Eisenhower tells Ben-Gurion, it's hard to be a president to 200 million Americans. Well, then Ben-Gurion responds, it's even harder to be a prime minister of 2 million prime ministers. For in Israel, everybody is a king. So I have to make everyone happy. There are different factions, there are different groups, there are different religions. There is this Arabs out there. Xi Jinping has a sly smile on his face. He feels content at that moment. And then he says, that's the problem with democracies. In your assessment, is China's communist capitalist system leading to stability as opposed to chaos in democracy? Professor Ranjan.
Thank you for this question. If we have to look, then there is a stability in the chaos, and there is a chaos in the stability, right? So we have to see that in the democracy that we are having, still there is chaos, but it's the kind of sustainable, that we can sustain. We have seen that is the transfer of power and all that. Now, from outside, it looks very attractive that the China is doing this and that. They are progressing economic development. They are becoming a superpower, right? And there are a lot of takers also that we have seen in the recent past, for example, Turkey, or for even example for Pakistan, when Imran Khan became prime minister of Pakistan, then he sent a delegation to study how the Chinese political party function. So there are a lot of admire also. But I think this is the one field that India should not compete, because for me, I think the democracy is our DNA. It's like our USP. It's like our soft power, and we are different. So of course, it will look like that the Chinese Communist Party is stable, and because they are different. And somebody has already mentioned that the Francis Fukuyama has already revised his thesis of the end of the history. So now, I think Chinese have forced Francis Fukuyama to modify his hypothesis. And if we see that in 1940 Congress, that when Xi Jinping was delivering his report to the Congress, then he said that, look, our model is so successful. But he he was hesitant, or he detested to promote like the Soviet Union has done, that this is more successful and you can import and we are ready to export. So here, what I think he stopped that this model is good, you can import, but we are not going to export for that moment, I think, because he was not so clear. But I think there is a kind of attractiveness. And because of we have this, in China, you have this one-party system, the system works smoothly sometimes. Because you have one decision making, once decided, like Professor Hunt was saying, that we all know about that, like the Belt and Road Initiative. But if you we remember, then in 2013, out of blue, Xi Jinping just announced that this is the One Belt, One Road initiative. One Belt, One Road. And it took almost 1 year to even come with the blueprint. So now, then we have to then all the institutions, all the state machineries come to a kind of help the state to achieve that goal. What we are lacking is, I think in India, is the will. The one is political will. And then, Professor, I think I'm entirely agree that we are having this ad hocism and we are becoming ad hoc power. I keep saying that we have going to be a kind of ad hoc power. If you see that any institution in India, like think tank, they are hired on contract. The institution, the universities, they are run by the ad hoc. Now you are not giving them even this kind of the employment security. They are not secure about their family, how they are going to support their family, how they are going to do the research. So we miss the kind of fundamental things. That is, you have to give them support and then let them free to do what they want to do. Of course, you can guide them that, okay, this is your goal and you have to write papers or you have to teach them. But no, we have teachers in Delhi University for 50 years ad hoc. Now, this is a kind of appalling situation, I think this. And now I think here, again, I'm agree with Professor Pant, that is the institution is responsible somewhere, because there are kind of some sort of there is a fear that once they become a kind of permanent or they become a kind of part of the government, they will not listen to us. So there is a kind of a policy of fire that, okay, you are not agree with me on any think tank or any institution, let me fire you. But we don't you have 3 years or 2 years contract in India. Now compare this with the Chinese. Even the China, they have this contractual job. All jobs are contractual in China, except the bureaucracy. But even in the bureaucracy, they have this, what they call it in India, we have APAR. They have also, even the contract also. Now, asking someone who has worked in India in think tank for 7 years, and then you ask him to give an exam again and appear for the interview, this is humility.
Yes.
Now you judge by what they have published in the past, what they have done, not by asking him to appear in interview. Now again, look how the Chinese are working. Even they are giving you a contractual job, all the benefit that we talked about, they call it 5 gold, Uchin. That is, they provide you pension, they provide you health, they provide you home, that is a kind of house, and they provide you also unemployment bhatta or allowances. So this is no matter whether you are a permanent or a contractual. So I think in this scenario, what I believe is China has learned from US. They have copied everything except what is called the model of government. So if you talk with the Chinese, then they will say that, okay, look, US has a 2-party system, we have 1-party system. So we are not so bad. They have also 2-party system, and they have copied it everything. Whether it's a school, whether it's an institution, and there is a professor in Brookings University who is talking about the revolving door. Where is the revolving door in India? Now, there is no revolving door, but there is a one way. And if you look at except some scholars like Subramaniam, that is the grandfather of the nuclear strategy, how many have came to the institution and they have adopted as an institution as a kind of researcher, and they have contributed. People comes and here becomes babus. They keep an eye on you rather than something contributing. So I think there should be a kind of if we want to become a kind of permanent power, then we have to devise our policy accordingly.
Right.
And I think Here comes the idea. Now, if you look at why United States, I think everyone knows why United States is a great power, because they have idea. And the ideas have come from everywhere, like the Rig Veda says, let the ideas come from every side. And I think Chinese have learned this thing. And of course, there are like backfiring, something like they have this 1,000 plans, like they have hired thousands of like hundreds of people from the United States, from Europe, to come and do the research. Of course, you are free to, whether they are right or not, whether to adopt into the policy or not, or like take their thing or not. But there are, of course, hiring. They are asking people to let the ideas come. Even though they're like one party system is opaque, but of course they are giving you all the benefit. They are hiding you. What happened here is we have we talk about the brain drain. Nobody is willing to come back from US to India to work. So what I say is like, what we have become as a servicing nation. We are serving, even whether it's a technology, whether it's a WhatsApp or Facebook, we are kind of like serving. Somebody pays us and then we serve. We are not making for India. Of course, it can be made in India, but it's not making for India. So we have to transform the whole institutions, whole scientific community, or whether it's like science, technology, academia. We have to do not only made in, but we have to make for India. And then only we can aspire to become a kind of like compete with any superpower for that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Vipul. We'll wind up. We got around 10 minutes more left to us. In short, 3 minutes, time limit, Mr. Vipul. Do you see Biden taking interest in the Blue Dot Network and Obama's TTP? Is TTP a better option for India?
Okay, so to build some perspective here, one by one, right? So first with Blue Dot, I'll come to TPP next. Looking at the Chinese infrastructure development via BRI with TPP under US IDFC, US wants to counter BRI globally through its multi-stockholder or rather multi-stakeholder initiative that aims to bring governments, the private sector, and the civil society for quality infrastructure for the countries who can't afford it right off the bat, right? So without having players like China loan dump and then coercing them into strong arm, this is actually what it means to have Blue Dot in place. Now, about TPP, that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was actually Obama's fruit of labor to create a larger pivot to Asia that has 11 nations making up 28 trillion in GDP in the Pacific Rim, right? So with all these things in perspective, my opinion here is India to go with TPP, because at RCEP, 1.2 billion is just from China, and we already are in huge trade balance or rather trade disbalance with China. So undoing that in current geopolitical situation looks like it's going to take some significant period to reach there. Also from APAC perspective and the trade deficit, India's annual export losses could very well touch 50 billion if China and the rest of APAC bloc would have decided to join the TPP, and in second stage with RCEP, didn't happen, leaving a few, right? In summation, as of now, India stands to benefit in terms of, TPP more than from RCEP. Yep.
Thanks, Vipul. That was a nice answer. Short, to the point. Probal, this is a question to you. China has been using sharp power through OBOR, through CPEC. What we are seeing in Pakistan, it has literally taken over the reins of the Commerce Ministry, the Power Ministry, and various other ministries, to the extent that there is a lot of corruption going on in the CPEC projects. And there is a lot of backlash from the opposition parties. Recently, a parliamentary committee came out with a report, and it saw that in the last 3 years, one Chinese power company was paid more than $3 billion as kickbacks. We go to Nepal. Again, Nepal, China is intervening at a very highest levels in between the parties. It is trying to bring together the parties to form a peace process. But about 2 days back, the Communist Party, I think, was on the verge of split. I think it must have already split up. Going back to Australia, China has been interfering in Australian internal affairs through Confucius Institutes, through universities. It's paying universities huge donations so that no individual on the university campus for example, in New South Wales, which is a state in Australia, that no individual speaks against China on the campus. This is the extent of sharp power which China has influence over in democracies like Australia. So how did China wage a perception war through the use of sharp power? Probal, the question for you.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last point. What is the?
How China is influencing its policies in Australia. For example, through Confucius Institutes,
right,
huge donations to universities in Australia, especially in New South Wales.
Yeah.
And then, no students in these particular universities can talk against any Chinese policies. The student, I think about 1 or 2 years back, a student was banned for speaking about China from one of the top Australian universities.
Sure. So, Mangesh, as I mentioned earlier, I think that is part of the overall Chinese strategy. And, it's, if you were to define sharp power as wielding, it's wielded by authoritarian regimes to manipulate, and influence opinion across various spheres in other countries. And you asked me a question about how it was, earlier, as to how today it's different from the time of Mao. I think this is one area which has been increased manyfold. And given that today, sharp power, I'll put it this way. I spoke about sharp power earlier as well, in terms of how China has been using a lot of money, $10 billion a year in external propaganda, wooing journalists and influencing public opinion. For instance, when the Chinese television company CCTV that started in Washington, D.C. in 2012, 5 former or then current BBC journalists immediately had joined the board, joined the firm. Similar thing happened in Kenya, and what was the result? The Ebola, spread that had happened at that point of time was reported differently. So and a prominent journalist, African journalist who had joined the Chinese television company, was asked, and he said, well, this is a way to tell another part of the story or a different perspective. So I think a very, very sophisticated use of this means to influence opinion is part of the overall plan. And just to take it forward, I would think that given the technology available at hand, artificial intelligence as well as cyber warfare, these are all disparate parts of an integrated strategy, information strategy that is at the heart of China's overall thought process in terms of influencing behavior towards itself. Earlier we spoke about how China has had different enemies, different adversaries at this point of time. I think that is one of the ways China believes that it would influence the opinions, etc. And I think that is where I would also think that China, for a long time, has not involved itself in any conflict. It is unlikely to fight a conventional war, but it is going to use more of such means, whether it is by loans, by technology, as I mentioned, through trade or influencing opinion. Matthew spoke about how Russians have been doing it very well since Cold War. I think that is something that they would take forward and use the military, the spending that they have done on military over the years as a means as a tool posture in the various conflict regions that they are in, whether it's South China Sea, whether it is elsewhere. I think that is, or in the Indian Ocean region. So that is something that they will use. And sharp power is, again, the question you asked. Again, it's a means to have a greater Chinese influence across the world. And I think that's you spoke about Nepal, you spoke about Australia, those have come about in the media in recent times, but it has always been a part of the Chinese thought process, and that is how we would see conflicts being imposed in future, instead of a direct conventional military conflict, which China has stayed away from since 1979.
We'll have the last question of this webinar to Professor Rajiv Ranjan. Professor Ranjan, Probal talked about the sharp power, but India has a long history of soft power, going back to 4,500, 5,000 years of history. We have Ayurveda, we have yoga, the Chalukyas and the South Indian dynasties actually went abroad. In terms of, we have the Hindu temples in Angkor Wat, we have a lot of influence over the political dynamics of the kings and the emperors and the history of Thailand. And the India's biggest soft power was non-violence and satyagraha and ahimsa, which overthrew a British Empire. It never happened before in history, and I don't think it's going to happen in anywhere in the future. Why doesn't India leverage its soft power as China is leveraging its sharp power abroad? Professor Ranjan.
Thank you, Mangesh ji. Like you have rightly pointed out that India has this soft power. We don't need to construct or kind of create that we see that China is doing now because of this Confucius Institute and all that. They have also like a kind of like Chinese culture and Chinese language that fascinated so many, a kind of like romanticizing the Chinese thing. Or if we look at the Indian efforts to kind of like to use this soft power as a diplomacy, I think recently it is started. I think it's in the right path. But I think we are kind of like, again, as Probal was saying, that when China went global, then it hired like CCTV or CGTN, then it has, you need funding. And you need also a kind of like a long-term strategy. We have this, you have this kind of like assets, but you don't know how to invest in the future or kind of like multiply the asset. So even like, if you like a biggest asset for India in soft power is a kind of like what we believe is a Buddhism. Right? If we see from the like Southeast Asia or like the East Asia, and then, but we haven't created like what I call it like a Buddhism corridor. Like what is the One Belt Road or like Silk Road it's like Nirvana route for like Chinese or like for the Japanese or Korean, but we haven't done that. I think because of our own internal kind of like emphasis, or whether we are going to give emphasis on Buddhism or not. So there was a kind of like dichotomy within China about like Hinduism and Buddhism, the Muslims or Hinduism, right? But we have to kind of consolidate this identity because this is our USP. Suppose we are going to create an alternate USB, then I think it's need much more investment and manpower than what we have. Now we have these movies like Bollywoods, but we haven't exploited much. Like for example, like I'm in China, like so sometime our traditional dancer or traditional musicians comes to play. But irony is that there is, Chinese never understand the Hindi or the Sanskrit or any language, Urdu for that matter. But if you look at, they don't have this background with the subtitles. So we are lacking this strategy. We lack this will to kind of like communicate. So suppose someone is like dancing like Bharatanatyam, but then you need to explain to the Chinese or explain to the Russian that what is going on. So I think again, and then we have also like what is our USP is also like soft power is the democracy, the tolerance, this secularism. We don't know from sitting inside India that these are our soft power. But if you go outside, I think, and this is also a dilemma for Chinese, that the Indian democracy, the robust democracy, the secularism is their USP. So whenever something goes bad with our democracy, like in the United States, Capitol Hill, this saga, the Chinese media was all about that, promoting, creating narrative that look what is happening in the democracy. Because this gives them the dilemma. That's kind of like reduces what you have called this communist capitalist model. So if the democracy is success, then how can they convince their audiences? So what we have to do is, I think we have to kind of like reorganize, give a kind of like much thought. And I think I have written a paper that we don't have to fall into a bureaucratic web. We have to kind of like come out of this bureaucracy sometime. We need to kind of create a consensus, kind of like not like one who is in the kind of like service, they know everything, and one who is outside the service know nothing. So I think we need to create a kind of like synergy. We have to kind of like create a symphony between what is the theory and what is the practice. And then I think we can exploit this soft power. But again, and like we were like once the China has started to say about the Buddhism, then we are also trying to create, let's say, a reactive policy. We don't have to react because ours are unique. So we have to again kind of like move away from the reactive policy. So it should not be guided by what the Chinese are saying or what the US are saying. It should be coming automatically. That this, oh, look, this is our policy and it is coming naturally rather than in response to someone. So if we say, okay, Indian Buddhism, then the Chinese are saying, okay, Chinese Buddhism. We don't have to create because Buddhism is only one. There is a different variant of Buddhism in China. Okay, that's it's true because like in Hindu, we are in India like a different, and then if you go to like Southeast Asian country, of course they don't kind of like have a Hinduism, but they have this culture. So we have 1,000 Ramayana. So we don't have to create this because this is our USP. This diversity is our soft power. And I think we need to kind of like reinvent, give a kind of like institutional backup, but with someone who had this zeal to promote rather than creating another institution with a bureaucratic head. I think that defies our purposes.
So, Mangesh, just to add to
yes,
Rajiv mentioned, sorry.
It's okay. I'm done.
Sorry, guys. No, just to add to what you mentioned, a couple of years back, I remember I was, in Nepal. They were talking about the pilgrimage tourism. So, just to add to your thing, there are people who are thinking, but I'm not sure how much integrated in, that thinking has been to the larger Indian thought process of introducing or integrating it with it's an organic sort of soft power existing within. So they were talking about it. They were talking of reviving their tourism, and I think it was a couple of years after the earthquake, and pilgrimage tourism, which is Hindu pilgrimage tourism and Buddhist pilgrimage tourism, was something that they were talking about. I don't know to what extent that has gained ground, but certainly it does not seem to have involved India in recent times.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for their superb views and contribution in these talks, and to our audience to be patient listeners.